Cat? That good?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 12th NixOS office hours. Today, our format is a little different if you couldn't already guess. We're going to be talking about Hydra's memory problems, the Flakes.nix merge, the Nixpkgs, and the RFC process. We're joined by Elko Dostra, the creator of Nix and the author of the Flakes RFC, and Alyssa Ross, a shepherd of the Flakes RFC and a notable Nixpkgs contributor. Graham, could you introduce the discussion?
Yeah. So over the past few weeks, there's been some changes to Nixpkgs, and particularly the Flakes.nix pull request merged. We had some trouble with Hydra and the evaluator, and so the tested job set for NixOS changed as well. And a few of these things happened on the Flakes branch of Nix itself, which I have caused some concern. And so we're going to talk about that today. I think people are a bit concerned that Flakes are being implemented into Nixpkgs officially a bit too fast, or concerns that NixOS actually depends on Flakes or Nixpkgs depends on Flakes, or even that Hydra is using Flakes to build NixOS or Nixpkgs. To start off, that's not true, but we're going to talk about all of that and a little bit more. Alyssa, we have Alyssa here to talk about her role on the RFC team. Alyssa, would you like to get started, talk about your concerns and your perspective?
Sure. So from my perspective as a shepherd of the Flakes RFC, there have been a few things that have happened over the course of the RFC process that have made me feel a bit nervous about Flakes and how the progress with it is being made. So from the beginning, there has been this idea that Flakes is the future of Nix, and that at some point we're going to have Flakes and things will be better, and that may well be the case. But as a shepherd on the RFC, I've always thought that it was important that we are aware as a community of exactly where Flakes are, and that we respect the RFC process, and that we can't say what the outcome is going to be of that. And that's always been the attitude that I have approached this from, but there have been times when I've been nervous that hasn't been how Flakes have been seen or how things have been done with respect to Flakes. So for example, in the past, we had some issue where we were going to have, I don't know, slashes in a branch name or something.
Oh, it looks like
I muted myself there. Apparently.
Yeah.
I was kind of just a little nervous that Flakes were sort of being taken as a given and something that was going to happen, and that's colored some of what happened later, which, from my perspective, was that a week or two ago, code was added to Nixpkgs. There was a flake.nix added and some Flake support in NixOS rebuild and NixOS install, I think, but I'm not sure about that. That was to add compatibility with using NixOS and Nixpkgs via Flakes. And this was surprising to me for a couple of reasons. One is that this was added the day of branch off. And the other thing that made me concerned about it was that this came at a time where we had no movement on the RFC for quite a while. Our last Shepherds meeting was in October, and there's not even been very much discussion since then. At the same time, I could see through the minutes of the RFC steering committee meetings, which happen every 2 weeks, and the minutes are published, that the Flakes RFC was being covered by, there might be a meeting soon, but there's ongoing work, so this is still moving along. And I had been assuming that that ongoing work meant work on the RFC, but after having seen this, I became nervous that ongoing work there actually meant ongoing work on Flakes outside of the RFC process. And as far as I know, the steering committee didn't didn't feel like it needed to take any action to make sure that the Flakes RFC was moving along. I later learned that Flakes, the reason for this PR, which added the Flake support, is that the NixOS.org build infrastructure is in some way using Flakes. I don't know what the
I'll be talking about that in a bit.
Yeah, and even that has made me a bit nervous, just because of the fact that the NixOS Foundation is using this. I worry signals this sort of this is ready, or that this is something that people could put into production. And really, overall, my main concern is not with Flakes, with their implementation, or whether they're a good or bad thing for the ecosystem, but really with the RFC process. As a shepherd on the RFC, I felt through this process that things were going ahead that usually would not be happening at this point in the life cycle of an RFC. The guidelines for an RFC, for example, say a bunch of stuff that basically implies that an RFC is something you do before adding code to Nixpkgs. And I was really overall just worried that in the case of Flakes, that wasn't what was happening. We were seeing code added while the RFC was still, from my point of view, in quite early stages. And I say that because the RFC as it stands covers a tiny, tiny part of Flakes. It just covers the lock file, nothing to do with the implementation or anything else. So it just felt like the RFC was not moving, but still the rollout of Flakes was happening without an RFC process. And I think that the RFC decision-making process is one of the best things that we have in our community. I think it lets us make really good, measured decisions. And I'm, for that reason, feel very protective of it. And I'm quite wary of anything that looks like it's going to go against that. So
Yeah.
From my perspective, that's what has been happening. It's made me feel just pretty nervous about a bunch of sort of overall community things beyond just Flakes. But a lot of this has come about because of this happening.
Right. I'd like to share my perspective on this situation as a release manager and as being a member of the RFC steering committee. That's good, right?
Yep.
Okay. So you did mention that throughout the time, the RFC steering committee wasn't actually talking about the Flakes PR. It was just that it was just work in progress, and that was it. And I'm pretty sure every meeting I was able to attend about that was for the RFCs, it was not really mentioned. So that was really concerning to me as well. It did seem very stalled for a very long time, at least to me and a lot of others. And the thing about the the Flakes PR is that it took me quite a bit to actually figure out it was a thing. I think maybe 2 months since it was open, I actually noticed it. But it was under my assumption that that PR was not going to be merged ever, at least until like the RFC was accepted like that. So that was what I thought. And the day I was supposed to branch off, this PR got merged, and I was really, really confused because that has all kinds of implications for me as a release manager. I just felt just very, very confused and very worried and concerned. And sort of the response I got on that RFC from people was very frustrated and having a very hard time figuring out what happened and what was going to happen. It was meant for Nix at large. So that's pretty much all I have to say.
So my plan from here is to talk a bit about the timeline of what happened and when, and sort of why as well. First, about the Flakes.nix merge. And I'm going to try to stay purely factual and not make any assessments about whether it was the right thing or not. But for pretty much as long as I know, I don't know of any time when the NixOS infrastructure didn't use experimental features of Nix. I believe it's effectively always used a version of Nix which was directly from master or directly from an experimental branch. And a lot of that is so that we can really intensely and carefully validate that it works and that it doesn't pose any regressions into the infrastructure. Especially with Hydra and our build farm, the size and scale of that build farm is pretty great and has a tendency to bring up especially concurrency bugs, if we happen to have any, really early. And so I know Ilko and I personally really appreciate that sort of validation. And so, yeah, in October, Flake support, at least preliminary Flake support, was added to NixOps so that we could put it into production and make sure that the format was workable and make sure that we could at least deploy something that was at least as complicated as our infrastructure using this idea. And so what that means is we for our production infrastructure, we switched to the Flakes branch. We enabled the experimental feature flag in Nix and pushed that out. And actually, that has already found a number of usability problems, among other things, around how Flakes work. So I think it's a good thing. One thing I want to make sure to call out is nothing about what we've done in this is fixed. We could undo and take out Flakes from all of this tomorrow, and it would change nothing effectively about how the infrastructure works or anything that we're currently doing. It's all something that we can do in different ways. That said, for the past several months since October, each of what we ended up having to do is deploy using a forked version of Nixpkgs, which did have the flake.nix. And that caused a bunch of problems for the hardware infrastructure team, especially around getting security updates deployed. Because it was a fork, it wasn't being distributed with the channel. We couldn't just follow the channel. And we had to be repeatedly rebasing onto master, or rather, I believe the 1909 channel. And so that's a big part of what motivated the merge of the flake.nix into Nixpkgs, is so that we could continue dogfooding it more easily without having to keep rebasing and updating this branch. And I just want to repeat the fact that if all of this is very flexible, so if anything, even major changes to Flakes had to happen, that would have been totally fine and expected. The second thing that happened in the last few weeks is the evaluator in Hydra ran out of memory. This has been a recurring problem every few months since 2017, I believe. And the typical solution is that we would go in and increase the garbage collector's initial heap size by a couple of gigabytes every few months, and it would fix it. But this time was a bit different. We recently had upgraded the server to have 64 gigabytes of RAM. And I believe the initial heap size was up to 34 or 35 gigs or so. And we couldn't easily increase the heap size because of other memory pressure on that system. And so we didn't have the same easy fix available to us. Ilko proposed one fix, which I think was universally not liked very much, which was deleting almost all of the tests. Each test adds a significant amount of memory to be required part of the evaluation. And deleting almost all of those tests was a great, quick, pragmatic solution that got rid of the memory pressure, but took away one of what I think is one of the most special values, special features, and incredible value adds that Nix is able to do. I think this testing infrastructure is incredible. I think it's a good thing to have. I think it's also the wrong message. I think we should be encouraging more people to be writing more tests as part of validating features and packages and modules that NixOS has. Ilko and I had discussed that, and so we looked at this alternative branch, this experimental branch for NixOS called Precise GC, which uses a different model from master, which uses a GC called BOEM. But the fact of the matter is that the tested job is too big. It depends on these huge, huge evaluations of NixOS to create these VMs. And there was essentially, it didn't matter if we had a better GC or not. That job itself required so much memory that there was no real solution. At which point I sort of felt like I was asking Ilko to pull a magic trick, because I didn't want to compromise on these tests, and also basically no other GC option was going to work. And I really felt like he pulled a rabbit out of his hat in a few days of work of changing how the tested job is constructed. He changed it from literally depending on these derivations to depending on the name of their attribute. This was pretty great. This enables us to do some interesting things. We can add many more tests. We can also finally add Arch64, the entire Arch64 test suite, to the standard NixOS channel. These are things that we couldn't do before because the memory pressure was too high. One of the downsides, or one of the things that happened as part of this, is this change happened on the Flakes branch of Nix. And this wasn't because it depended on Nix or used anything having to do with Nix. This is just a side effect of the fact that Flakes is the branch that we deploy to production. This has some downsides. It means that if there are third-party Hydras, which there are, evaluating NixOS, it means that they can no longer use Hydra to build NixOS without the Flakes branch as well. It had the downside that people thought it had to do with Flakes when it didn't actually. And it also has this downside that it's harder for users to evaluate NixOS like Hydra does to validate that their code is correct. It's also one of the other major problems that I think a lot of people ran into is the tested job itself for the older branches that didn't get updated ended up in this problem where because the architecture of the evaluator for Hydra was redone, it no longer had 30 gigabytes to evaluate. And so that 30 gigabytes was fine for the older branches like 1909, but wasn't fine for master. And this new branch gave it much less memory, which was below what the older branches did. And we didn't quickly enough update the older branches to follow the same model. From here, some work has been done to move the evaluator back into Hydra so that it's all self-contained, and so people can upgrade Hydra and have the fixes. And also there's been looking into changing the tested job to behave like it used to for command line users who are local. But the important things I want to make sure are that come across are that the memory pressure has been a problem that's been building for several years, and we were really running out of options. The change to the evaluation model has opened up what I believe to be new possibilities around how much we can scale, how many tests we can have. It makes it possible for us to look into seriously supporting ARM v7L or Power 9, projects that I've wanted to do for a long time but haven't been able to because of this fear of memory pressure. And the second thing that I want to make sure is clear is that from my perspective and from the infrastructure's perspective, the use of Flakes is purely just as a validation of the idea, the concept, and the file format. And any changes that are needed will be done. And with that, I guess I'd like to pass it off to Ilko to provide his perspective on the status of the RFC.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, maybe I should just respond a bit to Alyssa's concerns that she expressed, because I think, yeah, there are. So I think actually we've been following the RFC process, but I've not been very good at communicating that. So I think the RFC process has actually been very useful here. So, for example, the Flake RFC has gone through some pretty major changes thanks to the feedback from the shepherds, and well, I think we have a few hundred comments on the RFC. So there have been some pretty major changes. So one is that the RFC has been massively reduced in scope. So it's in its current version, it only talks about the Flake file format and the log file format. It doesn't talk about Nix CLI changes and things like that. So yeah, the scope has been reduced quite a lot, but that also meant that all the work that was happening on the implementation didn't actually require any updates to the RFC anymore. So you mentioned that the steering committee notes mentioned ongoing work every week. That was actually referring to the implementation. So there was no ongoing work on the RFC because there weren't really many changes to the file format. So I did update it, when was it, 2 weeks ago or so. There was a new log file format, this new attribute set based way of specifying inputs, and some changes to the log file generation. So the RFC was updated to reflect that. So there was also a question of, is it okay to implement things before the RFC has been accepted? So in my opinion, the RFC process is not intended to preclude people from doing an experimental implementation. In fact, people doing an experimental implementation is a good thing. We just don't want those things to be inflicted on users when it hasn't been accepted yet. So I think that's the case here. So the current status of the Flake implementation has, so there are two parts of it. There's the Flake branch of Nix itself. So that's still a branch, nothing has been merged. And even on that branch, Flake support is hidden behind an experimental feature flag. So that was actually one of the major outcomes of the Shepherd's meetings. So we decided to add this notion of experimental features to Nix, which I think is very helpful because it allows us to add all sorts of things like recursive Nix support or content addressability. So all sorts of things that previously existed on various experimental branches. So we can now actually have these things in principle on master for people to play with, but they explicitly have to enable them, so they're aware that they're using something that might be removed in the future or might change. Just like say the Rust compiler has feature gates for those sorts of things. So Flakes is still on a branch, but even if it got merged into master, it would actually still be hidden from users, and unless they explicitly enable it, and then it should be very clear to them that it's experimental. So then there's the change to Nixpkgs. So there was this pull request that adds a flake.nix to Nixpkgs. So what I want to stress here is if you don't use Flakes, this doesn't affect you at all. It has no impact on you. It's So the question is it okay to merge such a thing experimentally? Yeah? So that file is actually, it has a warning at the top that it's experimental, even if that's a bit superfluous, because the only way that you could use it is via an experimental feature in Nix. But we do want to make it clear to people that this is experimental. The file format can and probably will change. So it's great if you start experimenting with this, and some people already have, and they've created some flakes. But you should be prepared for the possibility that it will change or could even be removed altogether. Now, so you could say, okay, but given that the RFC hasn't been accepted yet, should we have this in Nixpkgs at all? And I think the RFC process for when it concerns Nixpkgs changes is primarily for things that could have an actual impact on people. So, for example, if you propose a change to the NixOS module system, that would obviously affect a lot of people, and it would create the possibility that people are going to start using such features, and it creates backwards compatibility issues. So those are cases when you want people to follow, you want things to have gone through the RFC process. But here we're talking about a feature that doesn't affect people who aren't using Flakes. So it's something that we can trivially remove in the future.
If I
go
may,
ahead.
Alyssa, could I hear what you think about that?
About whether we should have the code in Nixpkgs?
The perspective around the development on the Flakes branch, given the contents of the RFC, and a little bit about the Flakes.nix, what he's thinking there.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So.
One more thing. I just want to be really aware of time. We're half an hour in. We typically shoot for 45 minutes, but might go up to an hour. Just want to keep that aware.
One thought I had when I was hearing about this is that this the fact that it was impossible to test out Flakes without adding a flake.nix to Nixpkgs implies that we've missed a requirement in the design of Flakes, which is that it should probably be possible to have a flake.nix not in the same repository as the expressions that it's building, which sound like they would have solved that problem. And the other question I had listening to that was, why, if this fix that did the fix the memory pressure was not important to Flakes, or was not related to Flakes. Why it couldn't have been added to master and then have master and Flakes merged, or have it added as a patch for the Foundation's deployment?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is, so actually it has been. So I've backported those changes to the master branch of Hydra. And yeah, the reason why I did it on Flakes first is because that's what Hydra.nixos.org was running, and we were under a bit of time pressure to get the channels working again. So
yeah,
that's
okay.
really...
Yeah, that whole situation was
pretty
very
simple.
stressful. It would have pushed the release much further if it wasn't fixed so quickly.
Right. And your first question, yeah, was it possible? Why not add Flake.nix to some external repository? I actually did consider that, because it is actually possible. So you could just have a sort of wrapper Flake that imports an external repository. So Flakes can actually depend on non-Flake repositories. So you could just pull in Nixpkgs. So the downside is that that makes it much harder to follow, to use arbitrary branches of Nixpkgs, because those, as say, a branch like NixOS 2003 would have to be mirrored in the wrapper repository as well. And,
Why?
And you wouldn't be able to point to an arbitrary revision of Nixpkgs without, well, actually you probably could, but it would make the notation a bit more messy. You would have to say something like inputs.nixpkgs wrapper.input.nixpkgs.revision is something. And the PR actually does make some other changes. So it adds support for Flakes to NixOS rebuild and NixOS container. Yeah, that's obviously a bit harder to do in a patch, or in a wrapper, I should say.
I don't understand why you would have to, why we couldn't have a way in the Flake.nix to say, I mean, maybe this is going a bit too deep for this call, but why we couldn't have just a way to say, we have a repo that only has the Flake.nix in it, and it just says, grab things from NixOS/Nixpkgs on this branch. I suppose you'd have to update it.
I'd like to
Yeah, so
propose
the short answer is that is possible, but it would just make the UI, well, and the UX in general, a lot, well, messier.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I believe Graham has something to say here.
Oh, sorry, Graham.
No, no worries. Thank you. I wanted to propose. There's no way we're going to discuss all of the very interesting and important technical discussions on this call. And I definitely we'll need to follow up on either the RFC or a future RFC, or in IRIS somewhere else on a lot of these. One of the things that was brought up in the NixOS office hours channel by EDEF was that one of the primary purposes of the RFC process is to communicate what's happening and what's changing. And I think there's merit to that. And I think it would be good, Ilko, announcing those sorts of changes ahead of time. Like if you're intending on opening like a branch that's been open for a long time, announcing that you're thinking about merging. Does that sound reasonable?
Are you asking me?
I think asking Ilko.
Okay.
I'm just muted. You there, Ilko?
Oh, sorry, I was talking, but I muted myself. Sorry about that. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I should have mentioned the Nixpkgs PR on the Flake RFC, and that I was going to merge it. Having said that, the PR was actually open for 5 months, and I had actually mentioned on IRC that I was intending to merge it, but obviously saying things on IRC is not a very open communication medium. So
Yes, and
that
it
was
was
not
very
a,
surprising to me.
yeah. But in my defense, I will say that a lot more impacting changes to Nixpkgs get merged all the time, and so this is a change that doesn't really impact anybody if you're not a Flake user. I'm not sure if Graham actually mentioned this, but so one of the reasons why we really did want to mention this, want to merge this, is because we were previously using a Nixpkgs fork, and yeah, that's not really a sustainable situation because that fork got updated very infrequently, and especially since the infrastructure is running on that, it was kind of important to stick with the upstream repo.
That sounds yeah. I think I did mention that, but it's good to make sure. I think there's a lot of different things we could talk about this at this point. Alyssa, do you have anything in particular you're thinking?
No, I don't think so. Not at the moment.
Do you feel like this has been productive?
Yes, I do, but I think there's still a lot to do to sort of unpick this and sort it out.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe we should talk a little bit, spend a few minutes talking about next steps from here. I believe there's a RFC meeting next Friday.
Yes, that's correct. That's the first one since October, and it came about because I raised my concerns about the way this was going with the shepherd.
Yeah. One moment. One other thing I think I think is a common refrain about all of the topics here is the sort of mysterious and untransparent way that this work has been done. And I think my impression is that a lot of that's causing people to feel that the RFC process is not being followed, even if the intention is to be following it. And so my thinking is that a good step before we've gotten to here would have been saying, I think this is in an experimental phase. I think we should merge this pull request. And I think we should experiment with it and leave this pull request, this RFC open for some period of time to experiment. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that would have been reasonable.
Yeah, I think this is a. Go ahead.
Sorry, did you say accept this pull request and then experiment with it?
Accept the Flakes.nix PR into Nixpkgs and say in the RFC PR that it is experimental and leave the RFC open. That's what I said.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Or meant to say. Alyssa, do you still agree?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I thought you said.
Tobias Flug is sending me a message. One thing he's pointing out is that there is no impact on users by merging that. But I think the part of the concern is people feeling that the RFC committee is not in control of the situation. Does that sound right, Alyssa?
Yes, so that was my main concern, but also there is an impact in terms of this is something that has to be maintained by everybody, and also that there's a chance that this could impact other people even if it's not intended to. Now, the risk of either of those things in this case, I think, wasn't all that big, but it was there.
I think I think an important outcome from here is making sure to increase the amount of communication that happens around what people's intentions are before things happen. Excuse me. And around experiments that are happening, the state of the RFC. Ilko, what are you thinking?
Oh, wait, oh, sorry, I was muted again. Yeah, this sounds good to me. Yeah.
Okay. I have some thoughts on what on something to bring up into the next RFC meeting, but I'm going to send that to the RFC team instead of bringing it up here. But I'm hopeful that we can repair this situation and not do it again.
I'd like to say that I think that there have been some other sort of smaller times where we've found ourselves in similar situations, just to make it clear that this isn't something isolated. And so I don't really want to go into this now, but another example where I think there could have been better communication somebody came to me a while ago who was concerned about PR that added some Rust into Nix, and they felt that PR also had been sort of open for a while, not too much discussion, merged, but they felt that it really kind of wasn't ready and had some bugs or something. I don't remember exactly the details, but I think that for changes that are in some way notable or big, there needs to be more communication before things are merged in case people have outstanding concerns. Because a lot of the time, people won't bring up things because they think, oh, well, I'll leave this to be discussed for a few months and see how it goes, because it's quite a way off. And giving them that chance to, if you have any objections, here's the time, is important for that sort of big change.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that completely. I think the greatest thing I've noticed is that it seemed like a lot of the communication happened here between Graham and Ilko. Is that right?
Certainly, yeah. A lot of the timeline on the fixes for the memory pressure were private between Ilko and I.
Yeah, I just sort of felt, this is my observation, that a lot of these things should have been handled with the shepherds.
How would that have helped fix the memory issues?
Not just the memory pressure issues, it's just sort of about the awareness of what's occurring in general. I think that goes back into the point about announcing intentions, is that for the most part, I wasn't sure about what was actually occurring at the current moment because of all that. Through this, and I've actually received this timeline. I actually understand everything you did completely, and I've actually sort of switched my feelings about the situation entirely. But I feel like that situation conspired because there wasn't you communicating exactly what was being done.
So maybe been more active about updating. There was a tracking ticket saying the memory pressure was causing failures. Maybe more aggressively updating that with what we were trying and looking at.
Yeah, I didn't like, as a shepherd, I didn't need to be involved in the kind of real heavy, we have to fix the evaluations now because the channels are stuck. But I would have appreciated an explanation of what had happened since it was relevant to the work that I'd been doing. And until tonight, I hadn't had one of those.
Right. Yeah, I think that would have been good. I know personally it felt like there's a meme, but it sort of felt like a fix it kind of thing. And we definitely didn't communicate as much as we could have on that front. I think my thinking is that the fact that we've had this call will help make it clear the sorts of things that need to be established on the RFC. And perhaps some of these things could be changed in the RFC process itself. I didn't do my homework. I didn't look to see if the RFC process has something like a state to account for. This RFC is like tentatively approved, but let's experiment for 6 months. And maybe it should.
I don't think we have anything like that. The only real state is, other than open or closed, is this in the final comment period or not?
Yeah. And so I think maybe for something like this, it should be able to represent that. I think it's really positive, the agreement to more clearly and more upfront talk about our intentions and changes that we're planning on making, pull requests that we'd like to merge. I feel there's been a lot of good progress and good agreement on that front here.
Yeah, I think also I'd like to have some follow-up with what's happening with the steering committee, because I feel that they should have been, they're the ones who are ultimately supposed to be responsible for making sure that we know where we are with the RFC and that it's being driven forward. And the fact that things were being recorded as there being work ongoing, when there kind of wasn't work ongoing related at all to the RFC, shows that the steering committee needs to be somehow more aware of what's actually going on, or be more prepared to take action to make sure that things are actually not stuck and are still going on. Because I think that with a couple of more meetings, the Flakes, the current RFC, which defines flake.nix, could be accepted. But because of the sort of confusion here, we've not actually made any progress in that.
Yeah, I would definitely take that. I don't think things were handled as well as they could have been in the committee.
And another question I would like to get resolved is, was the pull request that added the flake.nix in any way related to getting the branches, to getting the channels unstuck?
No.
Okay, because I think that those have sort of,
Yes.
they happened at about the same time, and they've got sort of stuck together in those in people's.
Yes.
Yeah, it definitely
So
intensifies the situation.
The
was there was there any reason then that had to be merged at that point in time?
Yes, because we didn't want to have another release cycle where we had to use a fork of Nixpkgs.
So, right, yeah, okay. So avoiding the fork was the reason for that rather
Yeah,
than...
Ilko, and I actually would have it would have been helpful if I was made aware of that, since that is in with the scope of release management that's important for a release. I would have appreciated that.
Right.
My thinking is from here we need to step outside of this call. It would be good to update the RFC process to account for this experimental phase. Maybe add something to the steering committee that if there's work being done on an RFC but no activity on the RFC itself, there's probably something not being communicated.
Mhm.
I think those two things would have caught the situation pretty well.
Yeah. It might also be nice, sort of on the wish list, if it was easier for people to get to be more involved in the development of Nix itself. I think that currently my impression is that not very many people are, but the development of Nix, even if we're not all actually working on it, is something that affects all of us. And so I don't know what I mean, having more active contributors would probably have helped here because more people would know what was going on.
Yes.
But also maybe even having sort of active non-contributors who were still staying up to date or something. I don't know.
Yes. I think one of the challenges of the Nix project is it's difficult to get involved and difficult to stay involved.
Yes.
Ilko and I were discussing this on Monday, actually. I would like to commit to having a proposal on how we can improve that.
Yes, I think that would be very good.
Yeah. One of the things that has been talked about and approved already actually is by the RFC is to have automatic testing on Nix pull requests, which I think will help a lot.
Yep, that's a good step. I was actually surprised to learn we didn't have that.
Yeah, and if somebody's able to help me implement that, that would help get that done faster. With these things, I feel we have a good set of things to do from here. Some good actions that we can, I think, would improve the situation, prevent this again. And to sum that up, by the way, that's a really great point, Alyssa, about the ease of contributing to Nix. So that's one. The second is representing the state in the RFC and making sure that the steering committee is aware of what ongoing work means and whether or not that's actually related to the RFC itself.
A way of raising, sorry.
Go ahead.
A way of raising issues like this actually would be an amazing thing I think we really, really should work on, because getting this to the point where it was discussable, despite there clearly being lots of people in the community who were unhappy with this, has taken up quite a lot of my time. It's been very stressful and draining. So
yeah,
I some sort of way where it could have been not that, where I could have, like, you know, there's these group I can go to or something and have this listened to would have been helpful as well.
Yeah, I want to thank
because-
you for bringing all of this up, by the way, and sending that email.
Yeah, we need a way to sort of make sure that we're actually following these processes that we intend to follow.
With that, we're nearing an hour. I've written that down as something to follow up on, and I'll send this note to you as well, and Ilko. Ilko, do you have any final thoughts?
You seem to be cutting out, being muted repeatedly, Elko.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. For some reason, my web browser stopped updating, but apparently when I click, it does register. Okay. No, I don't have much more to say at the moment, but I'm very grateful for the input, and probably we should. I should do better at communicating things. That's not really my strongest suit.
Thank you for suggesting and putting together this call. I think that this was really, really good, not just for this issue, but for making sure that we can handle this sort of thing better going forward. That was really good. Thank you.
Okay, I will send some notes after this call.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Graham and World of Peace as well, for organizing this.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure to do this for all of you.
Yeah.
Ilko, looks like you have your hand raised.
I think that was
Anyways, thank everyone for coming to this call, listening, just being here with us to discuss this issue. It's really appreciated. So I think that wraps it up. Nice talking to all of you.
I have a couple of announcements.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I wasn't aware of that.
Unless something changes, our next office hours will be March 5th. If you'd like to be a guest speaker, please get in touch. And Zimbatim's Nix Fridays are on hold for the time being. Petty is still streaming his Haskell packaging updates, and you can find him at Original Petty, P-E-T-I, on Twitter. And that's all. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope this has been really good. I really appreciate Ilko coming and Alyssa coming and bringing this up. And everybody in the community who also brought this up. It was definitely a concern shared by many people. Thank you all a lot.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.